Hello and welcome to the Matchbook Horse Racing podcast. This week it is a betting strategy special with a view specifically to the National Hunt season, which is kicking off as we speak, and there's a lot to look forward to. Pleased to say that joining me for this betting strategy special, which isn't as easy to get your mouth around as you might hope, but I think I got away with it. Sam Turner and Donn McClean. How are we, guys? We're looking ahead to the National Hunt campaign, and it's all ahead of us, so nothing's gone wrong yet, Sam.
Well, speak for yourself, Tom. Obviously, Chepstow was 2 or 3 weeks ago. I left a few quid there as well, which was, probably one point that we should touch on is trying to bet winners early season in the National Hunt game is not an easy tactic or strategy to employ, really, because you can see some stables have made a blistering start, some stables are very quiet, and that is something you have to bear in mind, and not overexposing yourself, so to speak, is a crucial factor in the early weeks of the season, I think.
Yeah, I think you touched on something interesting there already, which I know we're going to expand on later on. But there are those old signs, Don, that Sam's picked up on there, where between Ireland, between the UK or wherever you're playing, you sort of know those horses or those yards, the best fresh thing that you might look out for a certain yard where you go, early season, I'm happy to play, but others I might just wait and see.
Yeah, it's a very interesting stroke, dangerous time of year there, Tom. I think you're kind of, while there are pointers and there are certain trainers, as Sam was talking about earlier, Nigel Twiston-Davis, for example, gets out of the blocks very quickly and wants to get going. Other trainers have the horses Gavin Cromwell's horses are in very good form and continue to be so. And that's a factor to take into account at this point of the year. But the form, you're kind of the end of the flat, the start of the National Hunt season. The ground is changing as well. So a lot of the summer horses that maybe racked up a bit of a sequence during the summer and better ground, they could be horses who might be over bet as they take on go on winter ground and take on the better horses who are coming in and are not automatically or not obviously race fit. But I think it's now more so than, let's say, 10, 15 years ago. Horses are fitter when they start back than they used to be. Like, we know Willie Mullins, he's a slow burn. He allows his horses to come through the season. But at the same time, his horses are generally fit enough to do themselves justice on the day, and especially with the big trainers, they can get the horses fit enough at home without having to have a run. Whereas, as recently as 10 years ago, you would have liked to have seen a horse have had a run before you're gonna take a chance on it. Well, again, depending on the price, which we'll cover all that later on as well.
I was in Sam the other day with Dan Barber on Racing TV, and we were covering Wetherby, and Sue Smith. I know this is something you just mentioned to me before we started recording. She had a load of runners, quite a few runners, and I'd say, good horses, in her yard. The calibre of horses she was sending out, I thought, she could have a good day here. And Dan was mentioning, look, I kind of just want to see how the first couple go with a view to one I might want to back later on. And the consensus was, leave it. They're all here potentially for another day. So that's something that's always worth bearing in mind. And just off the back of that, I'll add that, personally, before I had a job in racing, when I was sat at home trying to pump full time for a living, April and October for me were sit on your hands jobs. They were blank months just because I didn't quite know where I was at or where the season was.
Yeah, February and May weren't too clever for me either, not to mention September. But I think it's a very valid point you make. I think, and Don touched on it, that training methods have improved so much in the last 15 to 20 years, mainly through Martin Pipes. I would say his influence has lifted the bar for a number of other trainers. But you still do have the old school trainers, and I would include Sue and Harvey Smith probably in that category, where fitness is a gradual case of putting building blocks in place for further on in the season. And I don't think there's anything wrong in that either. So there's room for every model, certainly in the National Hunt sphere, and it's just identifying really which stables are going to be a little bit sharper. I think probably because we've had a wetter autumn, there's probably an opportunity for more trainers to get on the grass to school more than they did last year, certainly. I mean, as Donn will tell you, in Ireland, it was ridiculous. The big meeting in February, they were taking horses out because it was fast ground at Leopardstown. So we had really strange conditions, a really dry winter last year. We're having quite a wet start to the campaign this year, and that should help them get some fitness into the horses quite quickly, I would think.
And it was dry all through. Excuse me, it was dry all through the season last year. Really, even at the start, I remember Willie Mullins saying that he couldn't. Like Albin Fodder, for example, he only had one run before going to Cheltenham, and he couldn't get his good horses out because the ground just wasn't good enough. To put them on grass at home, and then B, to allow them run. So hopefully, we'll get a more traditional national hunt season this year.
I was just going to say, while we're on trainer specifics, and come on to the Willie Mullins point, who I think he was saying at the start of last season that, because they hadn't been on the grass, it felt as though he had quite a slow start for him to the season. For all then, Cheltenham was very good, and we kicked on to the sort of really from the Dublin Racing Festival onwards, it just got better and better. Do you guys look at that quite a lot with regards to what yards are in form at a certain point, or at the start of the season? For me, it used to be, well, Charlie Longston horses in September, off we go. John Joe O'Neill as well, and then perhaps over the winter back off a bit, and then they come again in the spring. Are you quite sort of fluid with regards to how the yard form is looking, whether or not you're side with a horse or not?
I think you have to adapt. I mean, and certain stables will be further forward some weeks or some years than they would be previous years. But I think traditionally there are methodologies that certain trainers employ, and they want to go a certain way. Nigel Twiston-Davies always wants to make a bright start to the season. Invariably, the first 2 or 3 months of the season, he sets off like house on fire. Then he can have a quiet spell, and then they come back in the spring. And I think Sir Mark Prescott used to divide the flat campaign up into 3 parts, didn't he? He said you can have 2 of those 3 parts, but you can't have all 3. And he would either load it towards the back end from the middle of the summer onto the autumn, or go hard in the spring and then come back in the autumn. So you just couldn't do all 3. So, and I think with now the National Hunt game being so centred around those big spring festivals as well, we see a lot of stables that they might start off early. They'll give them a break all around Christmas, where they perceive the ground's going to be attritional. Keep them fresh, and then start building up from Newbury or Leopardstown in February towards March and April, where you might go to Aintree, Cheltenham or Punchestown. So we see where the various trainers really do target those particular meetings, and where they are more concentrated with the runners. Obviously, Willie Mullins doesn't go to Aintree that much, bar a couple of horses perhaps, and will very much focus on Punchestown because he perceives that to be the pinnacle of the Irish season. So that's understandable. It's just identifying those patterns and trends can help you sometimes.
I think just to build on Sam's point there, Tom, trainer form, it's a factor, and there are lots of factors. There are hundreds of factors that you have to take into account, and it is one of them. It's an important factor, but at the same time, I think trainers can come in and out of form quite quickly. I remember Venetia Williams, might have been 2 or 3 years ago. She was completely out of form, and then I didn't back one of our horses at Ascot, and I think she had a treble at Ascot on the day after not having had a winner for quite a while. So it's a factor, but you have to take it into account. I wouldn't be put off a horse because a trainer looks to be out of form unless it was an extremely poor run of form. There are degrees of it, and then there are degrees of trainer form, either in form or out of form, married to the price that you're getting about a horse, because these days as well, trainer form tends to be built into a price, whereas a few years ago, it wasn't something that was universally spoken about, and it was an edge. And, all I suppose permeating this whole chat is about getting an edge and about, betting at a price that is bigger than what you judge the true price to be.
I was about to mention Venetia Williams. I'm very glad you did it, because she was the one who I was going to mention when we talk about, we definitely do this. We say, it's mid to November, early December, the mud's flying, it's Venetia time. And I think I quite often do this. I see parts of the season with the National Hunt season and think, I will back this yard's horses, as long as they're, not what I consider to be drastically out of form, at a certain time of the year. And Venetia fits that billing when the mud is flying for some reason, to the point where if I see sometimes a horse of hers who's got really good form on good ground, I'm almost going, oh, blimey, that's out of the norm. And I'm not sure if that actually exists. It's something that's been built into my betting psyche over the years, if you like. The other thing would be, quite a lot of yards, really January, early February, just take their foot off the gas a bit and don't throw out so many horses. Paul Nicholls, we know, and this came to the fore last year with the flu jabs. We know he gives his horses the flu jabs in early January, and perhaps they just back off a bit. But then middle to end of January, I feel that that they're almost always on the go from there on, and they're well worth respecting for me when they're back out and ready to roll, whereas others just take a little bit longer to come back. So I don't know if that's something that you have, Sam, in your mind, with specific areas of the national hunt season you might completely pull the plug on a certain yard, or you might get after a yard for whatever reason.
Well, he's quite crafty, isn't he, poor Nicholas? Because he inoculates them all in January, then clears off to Barbados for a couple of weeks. So he's got game by the absolutes, hasn't he? Yeah, I think certainly certain tracks and ground conditions would affect how I'd look at races as well. Sort of Nicky Henderson around Kempton, on decent ground where he seems to have a lot of speed-based horses rather than stamina-laden horses. I know he does train the odd staying chaser to win, but they're very much an exception to the rule, really. Most of them are speed-based horses that show a bit of toe, and predominantly have got a lot of natural speed and pace and travel work well in their races. So I wouldn't necessarily want to bet those or tip those around Fontwell when it's hot deep, but I'd want to be on a Venetia Williams horse around there. I wouldn't necessarily want to be on a Venetia Williams horse around Kempton on good ground, whereas Nicky Henderson's, and it's a huge generalisation, I know, but they do seem to train at Seven Barrows a lot of those type of nice travelly horses that swing off the bridle through their races and have loads of latent pace. So they're just little things that over the years you just pick up a trainer's trends, really, and the way they have. I would say they have favourite type of horse that they like to train as well, and they're probably also dictated to by their training establishment, the gallops that they can use, and just the way that they were brought through the game, really. Obviously, Venetia Williams, there's down in Herefordshire, there's that big influence, the Tim Forster influence, the John Edwards influence, the Stay and Chase influence there. And it's understandable that she would then lean towards that type of horse, but it doesn't mean to say that she couldn't train something a bit quicker and a bit speedier if she wanted to. Lady Rebecca wasn't short of pace, was she?
That moves us on quite nicely to a question which I really wanted to ask both of you on track specifics. And again, I think in the more public, obvious domain at Haydock last year, when they redid the fences and they were all of a sudden not just bigger, but much stiffer, much more compact and less forgiving if you just got through the top of them. Some say that did for Mike Bite for the rest of the year. I don't know, but that clearly caused him some issues. Do we, Donn, first of all, perhaps with an eye on Ireland, perhaps, do you have sort of an idea as to what horses will jump better or less well, perhaps, at a certain track because of the way it is set up, the undulations of the track, the fences that track has?
Absolutely, Todd. Like it's a massive factor, course configuration, and I think course form as well, both on the flat and over jumps. Like course form, we know the phrase horse for courses, but it's a factor, and also race form, as in if a horse is going back for a race that it's won or over a course and distance over which it's proved to be effective in the past. I think that also influences a trainer in terms of going, well, look, it went well at Haydock before, it went well at Gorham Park before, we'll go back there. And it's not just down to course configuration. I think it's down, like, it doesn't really matter why it is. If a horse has proven that it goes at a particular track, then it's a positive if and when it goes back to that track. And I think there are certain tracks and certain conditions at which and on which course ground form is more important than it is at others. Like I think York on soft ground, for example, if a horse is proven, and if it is soft ground at York, to go back to York with a horse who's proven A at York and B at York on soft ground, I think it's a massive factor. Ascot as well. I think Ascot and York are two tracks at which course form is very, very important. And then, the over jumps, I guess the small Kilbeggan or, smaller, tighter tracks that horses have proven that they can handle either the track or a similar type of track. That's key. I think if a horse is proven at a right-handed track and going back right-handed, that's a factor as well, more so than if it's proven left-handed going back at a left-handed track, I think, because right-handed is just, I just think there's more, it's more of a positive going to a right-handed track proven right-handed than it is going left. So look, all those factors, and again, in my betting starts with the horse, and then after that, as in, is the horse good enough to win? And then after that, it's all the other factors: course, ground, trainer form, jockey, all of that taken into account. But no, I course form, it's absolutely a factor. Or like course form, as in if it's proven at a track that is similar in terms of configuration, that's obviously a positive. But again, it has to be factored into with the horse and with the price at which you're betting.
And I think, go on, Sam.
Sorry, Sam. I was just going to quickly add. I think as a sort of a tipster punter like Don and like yourself, I think course form for me anyway is one of the most important factors in sort of trying to pick winners and back winners. If I'm honest, I just think asking the horse to go and do something that he's already been comfortable or proved his effectiveness at doing is a major point. If we feel comfortable in our natural environment, I'm damn sure that equine talent does as well. I think it really helps if you've got a horse that operates on a certain track, whether it be Frodon, around that one particular track at Cheltenham, or whoever it might be. I just think it can help you sort of differentiate in a race, and with so many races to tackle almost on a daily basis, I think sometimes it's a good way of separating the wheat from the chaff from a betting perspective as well, and just identifying good course horses can be a massive massive part of the jigsaw really, and just eliminate and trim some of those races where you might get drawn into where none of the horses have been around the track, or none of them have tackled York before, and you just think, I don't really know how they're going to go on the terrain here. I'll just swerve that and go somewhere else.
If I'm doing quick study, which is never ideal, but there are occasions, as we all know, working in the industry, where you might have to preview a race or give thoughts on a race, or you might be, I might be sat there with one of you guys on a Saturday afternoon, and we might have a team of people covering a race meeting and a race that I haven't really got stuck into, but I might say, the sort of shape of this race, I think there could be an angle in here. And you'll do that slightly quicker study and go through a race card, and that C for course form, and particularly if it's got a D next to it for course and distance, for me, as you say, can be one of the biggest reasons to seriously consider a horse over anything else and get that shortlist. Particularly if it is an idiosyncratic track, a track where for me, I might want to have. Cheltenham would be right up there for me as one of the more obvious ones, where if I see a horse has got course form, then that's such a huge bonus against a horse perhaps tackling it in a traditionally big field that you get at Cheltenham for the first time. Then when you come on to festival form, if we could for the Cheltenham Festival. I love talking about the Cheltenham Festival in October, but
any excuse to get Cheltenham Festival in October.
Exactly. But festival form is again different for me altogether. As a plus, more so than course form, because that is a different beast altogether. But I completely agree with, if you're looking for a horse to do what it's done before, that is, even if it's out of form or got a different jockey on board or got to change a head kit, over all those other factors, that can be one of the biggest ticks in its corner.
Yeah, like festival form, just to expand that a bit, Tom, it's massive. I fully agree. Like Cheltenham form, going back to Cheltenham, let's say going back to the Cheltenham Festival with just Cheltenham form at a non-festival meeting, that's important. But there's so many different aspects of the Cheltenham Festival. Like generally, it hasn't been the case maybe in recent years, but generally the ground is faster than it has been encountering all season. There's the atmosphere, there's the pace they go, there's a competitive nature of it. There's the time of year as well. So if a horse is run well in January, it doesn't necessarily mean it's good. So you go back to Cheltenham Festival, and again, it doesn't matter why. If you just know that a horse has performed or won or run well at the festival under those conditions, which are, if not unique, then very, very unusual for a National Hunt racehorse to encounter at the Cheltenham Festival, it's a massive positive going back. And likewise, go to Punchestown. If a horse performed at Punchestown before, because Punchestown, we're getting towards the end of the season. It is the end of the season. It's the last week of the season, and for all of that, horses haven't come through the season if they've proven that they've performed at Punchestown before, which is also a right-handed track. That's they're massive factors if they're proven on the course first of all, but also at the meeting, especially if it's a meeting that's an unusual meeting with unusual aspects to it. It's a massive positive.
There was a stat going back. And this is the last thing we'll say about this on the Cheltenham Festival, because I've got to save all these. But there was a stat going back to the Gold Cup a few years ago. Well, I can't remember exactly when it was, 5 or 6 years ago, whenever said horse won the Gold Cup. If you'd have backed every horse that had run at the previous Cheltenham Festival and been placed or won, you would have been in profit at the subsequent year's Cheltenham Festival. And going into it that year, come the Gold Cup, I remember texting a pal that had given me this stat and said, not going to happen this year. And then Lord Windermere won the Gold Cup 40-1, and you went, oh, it's happened again. So there you go. But it is for whatever reason, it's a huge thing. So I always pay attention to. Anything else to add on those specifics? We're happy there.
Happy there, Tom. Yeah, just a quick wrap up point. It just goes back to where a horse is comfortable, really, and you know, if you've got a horse, as Donn's alluded to, that's comfortable at the back end of the season in a big field with all the razzmatazz of a big festival, then they're worth the weight in gold, really, because you're not asking them to do anything they haven't already done before.
And one more on that, which you mentioned there. Are you guys? I often hear it, and I've often paid attention to it before as well, where you sort of say it's November, it's this horse's time of year, or a trainer will say he really comes to himself in the spring. If a horse has got form doing something at a certain time of year, again, is that something that's overplayed, or would you really pay attention to that?
No, it's important. Yeah, absolutely, it's important. And you know, just because it's gone well in November before, and let's say the Hennessy or the Ladbrokes Trophy is on the 1st of December, that you don't rule it out because it hasn't won in December before. But no, it definitely is a factor. And again, it's down to it. Again, it doesn't matter why. It's whether it's down to training methodology or how a horse comes, or the ground, or you know, how many runs it takes to get itself fit, or just that time of year. It doesn't really matter why. You know, mares coming in the autumn, all of that stuff. If it's a factor, and if the evidence is there that it's happened before, let's say it's record from November to the start of November to the end of January is positive in its last 2 or 3 years racing, it's obviously a positive it's running at that time again this year, I think.
And I think that's the beauty of national and horses, Tom, as well. They build up patterns.
Yeah.
I also think there's a lot to do with around stables, the atmospherics as well, because there'll be certain things growing in adjoining fields that might affect a horse's respiratory issue, well-being, and I think that sometimes does have an effect, certainly on plat horses, when in the spring there's all sorts of things growing in adjoining fields to where horses might be working that would affect how a horse manages to breathe and how clear their lungs are, etc. There were certain trainers in Shropshire, I know, that there was that sort of horse who grape was growing, and they wouldn't train a winner for a month or 6 weeks because the horses were just sick, or they just couldn't get enough oxygen into their lungs to operate properly. So these sort of things do take an effect. The existential factors do take an effect, and I think the nice thing with the national hunt horses is that we can see a pattern emerge of what suits them, whether a small field or a big field suits them, and you can start to build up a nice sort of they build up a nice CV of when their effective conditions are at their utmost, really. And if you watch these every day and you see the patterns develop year on year on year, then that could be a nice route to backing a few winners.
Whilst we're still, before we get a bit more technical, whilst we're still on race specifics, if you like, and specifics about a yard, etc. One of the things which I used to differentiate between, and I do less so now, between flat and national hunt season, for example, is how a race is going to be run, the shape of a race, and where the pace is, and it maybe a decade ago it used to be something where I'd start with on the flat and then come to later on when I was looking at national hunt season. And more recently I've started to pay a good deal more attention to it over jumps, and sort of thought, I don't know why I never used to see it as important. Would you say it's as important with regard to the jumping game as it is the flat, how a race is likely to be run? Obviously there's fences or hurdles more often than not in the way over jumps, but I think for me it's almost of equal importance as it is on the flat, the shape of a race, where the pace is coming from. Is it going to suit the specific horse I want to back?
Yeah, no, it's key, Tom. Absolutely. Like if you have a horse who runs keenly, and I think absolutely, it's as relevant on the flat as it is over jumps. You want to know there's going to be a pace on. If you have a horse who's keen running in a 4-horse race where there's no obvious front runner, then that's obviously not a positive. If you have a horse running in a 26-runner handicap over a straight mile at Ascot that wants to be held up, then you're probably going to get your fast pace. And it's back down to course form, race conditions, circumstances under which horses have run well in the past. And we're back to Cheltenham Festival form. That's the frenetic pace of those races. Generally, they're run quickly, and horses have proven that they can operate on those conditions. That's a positive. A horse who's a front runner, if there's no other obvious front runner in the race, that's a positive. It might get an easy lead. So of course there are massive elements to take into account. And also I think when reviewing races, if a horse ran well, having not had the race run to suit, I think, that's a massive factor as well. In a lot of, Sam's the same and you're the same, Tom, you spend a lot of time watching races and taking notes on horses who have run, and it's an edge that we're in a lucky position to be able to. This is what we do for a living, so you have the time to review races and watch them back and see things that maybe the general public haven't spotted, and I think that's a massive edge. It's watching back races and seeing a horse who raced too keenly for the first 4 furlongs, or and ran on well despite having run keenly. That's a horse who you can mark up for the next time, and a horse who might be under bet and therefore overpriced next time.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with Donn there. I mean, there was perhaps an instance we can use as an example, the Silver Trophy at Chepstow the other day, which looked a brutal gallop from start to finish. I think it was Imperial Aura, was it the horse that sort of, I think he finished 3rd or 4th in the end, and he was the only one sort of to lie up with a pace there. So you'd immediately mark that up, if that race hasn't taken its toll on him, then you'd be looking as a possible bet further down the line. And he's obviously got a bit of ability, but just to use those sort of effective tools really as a punter, as a tipster, just there's no substitute for going back and watching races that you just spot something, as Donn says, that might just escape the norm. And people are obviously drawn to certain horses in a race, and you might just spot something out the back that might give you a winner in 2 or 3 weeks time, and that's the best form study really for me. Just watching with your own eyes and making notes.
The example certainly last year and plenty of years that I'd be drawn to of a track riding a certain way would be Cheltenham in November, that old course when it gets testing and horses come towards the stand side. I think was it Cool Cody who pretty much made all round going the furthest way around possible.
Yeah, the hurdle track.
Yeah, and you look at that and you go, I know we're focusing on fences and obstacles and it's the national hunt season and how horses jump, etc. But where certain horses were positioned there, I was backing horses that raced around the inner, but on the worst ground for I can't remember if I made profit on them, but for much of the rest of the season because they were so disadvantaged to where they raced. But again, something which I didn't always hold at the forefront of betting strategy when it came to the national hunt season. But now I think it's so important.
Yeah, I think identifying horses that have run well against a certain track bias or against a pace bias, that could be another massive angle in really as well. And it again comes from what you see with your eyes and how you interpret a race really. I do think the level of punditry, both on the channel that we'll work on and perhaps elsewhere, has raised to another level, and people do spot these things a lot better now. And I think pace analysis has improved a lot. I think when I started TV, when it was black and white, I don't think we really talked about where's the pace coming from in this race. But now, under both codes, I think it's quite a comprehensive discussion most of the time. So that's another area of punditry and analysis that has improved and is improving now, I think. But I think the start of the race is crucial as well. I don't think enough people put enough store in the start of the race. Certainly, horses slowly away from the stalls, or a horse that might make an early mistake, how that can throw you out of a rhythm and put you behind the 8 ball so early. I think sometimes that's worth having a little bit more of a look at as well. What pace they went on a flat race in the first 2 furlongs as opposed to always the last 2 furlongs. I think that can be crucial.
That's massive. Yeah, sorry.
Just on the clock, sorry, while we're on that, while I keep jumping in, do you guys, I know that we focus on the clock with regards to flat racing. I know Sam does his own times with regards to that, but do either of you guys use sectionals or the clock when it comes to national hunt racing? Andy Holding, for example, is brilliant at doing so. Is that something that you guys focus on?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm good friends with Andy. I would do the flat times, the overall times. Andy does the sort of the sectionals and the circuit times on the jumps. So we have a sort of a share of information. We've got a third friend who actually does the overall times for the national hunt as well. So, as you can see, it's difficult for it to be a one-man job because of the volume of racing. But if you can find 2 or 3 people that you can pool your resources with, I think that will help you, hugely. And I do think the circuit times, I think Donn probably tell you that he uses them as well. I think they're a valuable tool. I know people think because they're going slower in a national hunt race, they aren't going to give you an advantage. But if you find a 0 to 105 handicap that are whistled round and done a circuit as quick as, perhaps a 0 to 140 event, then you are on something that other people aren't so aware of, and that essentially is what punting and winning at punting is all about, isn't it? Trying to find an angle which other people and the crowd aren't utilising themselves.
Yeah, no, it's all about an edge, and look, I wouldn't go to the forensic lengths that Sam goes. I hope to read some Sam's about his work and utilise that. But no, it's massive. Look, you take overall times into account, definitely in national hunt, it's as important as flat. And just going back to having an edge and all the forensic analysis that there is of races and of pace and of track position. Sometimes it's the kind of the obvious ones that are nearly underrated next time, like the winner of the Air Gold Cup, for example, Angel Alexander. I thought he raced against all the biases going and still won. He's a horse who could be even underrated, even though he's won an Air Gold Cup. I think going forward, Search for a Song likewise. She was so keen in the Irish St. Ledger, and she was beating Kew Gardens. Obviously that form is upheld, albeit Kew Gardens probably improved from that run to Saturday. But I think there's such a depth of analysis now that it's nearly a double bluff. You're nearly going back on yourself, that it's the obvious ones who might be the ones who are a little bit overlooked next time.
He had to get Kew Gardens in there, didn't he? He had to get it in there. Mr. I took on Stradivarius.
I still haven't recovered all I've lost going against Stradivarius for the season, Tom, and that's without going back over the last 2 seasons.
Which brings us on actually to something you can do matchbook specifically, of course, and it'll come into your betting strategy for this national hunt season. But backing and laying, we talked, Donn, about how we approach Stradivarius, just harking back to the end of the flat season, and a horse that I'd pretty much taken on all year and had laid a fair few times, and that didn't go so well. And I didn't on this occasion. I left it alone personally, but of course he went over and got beat. But is that, Donn, first of all, something that will you find yourself pressing blue and pressing pink as much as each other, or do you focus on backing over laying, or vice versa?
I'm not a massive layer anymore, Tom. Not since the Cattle Star era. He cured me of laying, I think. I always thought he was too short, and proved he was never too short. Yeah, I kind of discovered that. Look, it's everybody to their own, but I don't think laying suits my psyche. Yeah, I'm kind of looking for the overpriced horse who represents value. I prefer to be with the horse than against the horse. And the other thing about laying is when you're laying a horse, you're effectively backing every other horse in the race. And some horses, you just might think they've just got no chance, or they're underpriced as well. So if you're laying a favourite or laying any horse, you're backing every other horse in the race. And if I think a favourite's vulnerable or a favourite's too short, I prefer back 2 or even 3 against it, because if you're backing 3 12 to 1 shots in a race, you're effectively betting at 130 those 3 horses. So and that might represent better value than laying a favourite at even money or 4 to 5 when you want those 3 horses on your side, but maybe you don't want the other 7 horses in the race on your side. So I think for me anyway, laying it, and then if you're laying a horse, you're nearly trying to lay it to win as much as you would be winning if you were backing the winner. Whereas that's, I know that's not the way, but that's psychologically, that's the way I tended to err with laying horses. So no, I think laying for me anyway, it's a great facility to have. It's if you don't fancy favourite, the simplest thing is just to lay it if you think it's underpriced. But I'd prefer if I see a vulnerable favourite, back 1 or 2 or 3 horses against it.
I personally used to. I went through a period of setting out every morning to find. It wasn't a specific amount, but it was normally between 2 and 5 favourites up to a certain price, which I would be against that day. It resulted in I remember listening to a race, and I think it was the 4th favourite of the day that I'd been against that day came in, and I remember I pulled over to a service station not far from where I now live and thought, how has that happened? Because I was strongly against all of them. But it's equally, it can be, or I felt at the time it was as you talk about betting psyche, the way I was looking at races, it was working quite well for me. And I was rather than wanting to find bits of value in each race, at a bigger price, I was quite happy to just be out and against the favourite. I've now moderated and just do a bit of both, but laying is definitely still a part of that strategy. We've seen some high profile instances on the flat towards the latter end of the season where you could have laid two apparent good things, both trained by John Gosden in very high profile races who haven't gone and done the business. But equally, if you'd have been against them for much of the season, it wouldn't have worked out for you. So what you talk about, Donn, is whether it fits into the way you want to approach your analysis of the race, is because it is a slightly different way of doing it, of course, but for me, it's an excellent tool.
Yeah, I'd agree for what it's worth. I mean, I think there are pitfalls with laying. Obviously, if you're going to lay a 10-to-1 chance, you've really got to try and lay 15 or 20 10-to-1 chances on any given day, really, because you know that if you're wrong twice, you're going to do a few quid in. I think your strategy was the best, Tom, when you look into the front end of the market, trying to pick favourites that haven't necessarily got a rock solid profile and try and take those on and try and do a number of them on any given day as well, and look at it across the whole year. I think it's got to be a strategy that you employ long term rather than short term, if I'm honest. And I think I would look anything from 2-to-1 down, because you don't have to be quite as, your strike rate doesn't have to be quite as good as if you were obviously laying bigger prices. And I think the only pitfall with laying at the front end of the market is because you're then laying good value, aren't you? Because the nature of the exchange is to bet to near enough 100%. So therefore, the favourite is going to be a slightly bigger price than you would ordinarily be laying at if you were laying on the book. So you're then laying good value, and you hear a lot of people speak and say there's a lot of value to be had at the front end of the market because everybody's trying to get them. So there are pitfalls either way. I prefer, if I'm going to lay, I would lay short now. I wouldn't lay big prices. I've heard tales of people say, well, this can't win at 16s, I'm going to take 100 quid out of it. And you're betting 16-to-1 on that it doesn't win. And I just don't think that's really, unless you're laying a lot of horses on any given day to the same amount of money, I don't think that's a long-term strategy that's going to work for you, really. Plus, how many times do you walk into a pub and go, oh, I laid this 16-to-1 chance to lose 1,600 quid today. I won myself 100 quid. You don't go in and brag about that when you go down the local boozer, do you? You want to brag about the 5-to-1 poke that you've backed that won the race, or the 20-to-1 chance that hit the frame. So it's just not. It doesn't suit my emotional threshold, really, leaving such a big exposure on one side on big price horses, and at the short end, I would look to lay horses that perhaps once raced, going up against more experienced horses, horses from big yards that have been, well touted and hyped up. You sometimes get, false prices there as well. And jockeys obviously have a big influence. Certain jockeys, horses are a point shorter than they should be. All those sort of things really you'd have a good look at. But I think your strategy was the best, Tom. Trying to find 3, 4, 5 on any given day that, all right, you found 4 winners on that day, and that was painful. But that can happen when you're betting. You could have 5, 6 strong bets, and all of them get beat. You've got to be careful that it's not recency bias dictating how your strategy moves forward, really.
Just picking up off that, the only other thing to add is there were a few instances this summer where I was on course and I'd lay a horse whose demeanour I didn't like. That would be the added thing. Not necessarily going through in the morning and thinking I'll be against that, but you get there. There was a horse at York, for example, and I just thought this. You just looked at it and thought, that doesn't win. I think it was about 3.0, but unfortunately it didn't. But its demeanour was just so odd. But then again, perhaps that's an edge of seeing it before pictures have been broadcast, if you like, and it did ease out a little bit, but obviously that can be a huge advantage. And then rather than trying to pick 3 or 4 at bigger prices in the field before you've seen them, you just go, I'm against that horse, so I'll lay it. But you mentioned something there, Sam, which was, I suppose, moving on to your bankroll management. You talked about strong bets. Will you guys put the same amount percentage-wise of whatever your bankroll is on a horse, or will you equate it to how good a bet you think that is, and therefore bet a slightly bigger percentage because you would consider that to be a better bet or a better value bet, if you like?
Personally, I have sort of A, B, and C bets. I mean, C bets are my more sort of recreational, just bet little and often type of strategy, really. A and B would probably, as they suggest, an A bet would be quite a decent bet, and B, the interim and the medium term bet. but I would have more C bets, obviously, because I prefer to bet little and often rather than, have a, one big splodge on something, 3, 4, 5 times a month. I know people who operate very successfully both ways. It's how your emotional threshold is, really, whether you like to have a little bit of action. I can go days without having a bet. Sometimes our racing isn't that great, so you want to have a couple of days off where the ground might be changing. You might not be interested, or you might delay a little bit more than you would to bet. But that's how I operate, and I try and have money in certain accounts and keep that money in account, and then it is separate from your day-to-day expenditure, really, and that then doesn't affect. If you have a bad day with your betting accounts, it doesn't affect whether you can pay the mortgage. It doesn't affect whether you can go out for a meal. Emotionally, those bad days are a little bit easier to deal with. I think if it's coming out of an account where there's just a figure on the account and it's not actually coming out of your bank account or your personal money or personal expenditure.
Yeah, I'd be similar enough, Tom. Kind of level stakes really is how I operate. I think I used to have small bets kind of ability or facility in my own head to have small bets, but they'd be fewer and fewer. I think but it is down to the value. Like if you think a horse should be 6-1 and he's 8-1, that's a bet. If you think a horse should be 6-1 and he's 12-1, that's a bigger bet. And I think generally we tend to go, oh, it's a bigger price, therefore I don't need to have so much on, or it's 6-4 shot, it'll win, I need to have this amount on to win this amount, that's what I want to win, so this is how much I need to have on. But I think it nearly should be the opposite. It should be like the bigger discrepancy there is between the the price that you think a horse should be, because nobody knows what the true odds are, but if the price you think a horse should be and the price that you're able to bet at, then that's when you should increase your stake. Whereas, generally they're hard to find, but generally if a horse is a wee bit bigger than you think it should be, and even if you don't do up your own tissues, you should have a notional price in your head as to what price you think a horse should be. And if a horse is significantly bigger or even a little bit bigger than that, then it's a bet. And to me, it depends the magnitude of the discrepancy that will determine how much you bet. But generally, I tend to bet to level stakes.
You mentioned tissues there. This is something I used to do for every race I was looking to play in, but I sort of find now that if I go through a race before prices, I pretty accurately will know which horse I'm going to back, because I can envisage it being bigger, than I think it should be, if that makes sense. So I don't go and tissue up a race every single time at all. But I don't know if you guys still do now.
No, I'm the exact same, Tom. I wouldn't do up a tissue anymore. You have a notional price in your head. And also these days, it's hard to price up a race without having seen some kind of an indication of prices before. Like you tend to get, as soon as entries or declarations are in, you tend to get some kind of especially for the bigger races, which is they're the races that I tend to major on anyway. You tend to have some kind of a guideline at least as to what prices horses are going to be. So, that's a hindrance in terms of you're not starting with a blank sheet and pricing up a race yourself from scratch. But it's also a kind of a guide as to, they have that tissue there says he should be 4-1. I think his chance is way better than that. So, I think to do up a tissue for every race is just such a volume of work now. Whereas if you have a notion in your head, and again, probably to stray into maybe another area, there is specialization. You need to specialize in this. You can't cover every race every day, that's for sure. So you need to specialize, or else get a team of people working for you like Sam has.
I wish.
I think it's hard now to do up a tissue without having been influenced somewhere along the way by some tissue or some kind of price guide that you've seen. So I think you have a notional. Me anyway, I have a notional price in my head, and if a horse is bigger, a lot bigger than that, then that's a bet.
I suppose one of the major things, particularly when you mentioned the biggest meeting, the bigger meetings, are quite a lot of people, and I'll do the same, will go, I know that horse is going to go for X race, not necessarily just talking about the festival, but that would be a prime example, and I'm going to back it there because it's going to win, and I'm going to be there, and that's the horse I want to, that's my banker of the meeting, if you like. But now value still has to come into it. If that horse goes there and shows out, and I suddenly think that he's shorter than it should be, I've You know, I think you've got to learn to hold off and say, right, as much as I was came here to go for that horse and that was for me, right now if it's not value, then it's not a bet. So for me, that would be the starting point of any bet is that value word. It has to be, or you don't get involved, personally.
Well, for sure. I mean, I suppose Lord North in the Cambridgeshire was a fairly decent example. I think everybody could sort of semi-read the plot and think that might be, you know, the quality horse in the race and could easily be masquerading as the group horse in the handicap. But, you know, whether you wanted to back it, I mean, it was sort of 5 and 6 in the morning, perhaps. I thought even that was incredibly tight, and it's going off 9-2, 4-1, 7-2, and the price just kept dropping. It was one on the bridle pretty much in the last 100 yards with the Italian looking over his shoulder and easing down, and you just think, well, okay, it's one that you earmark early part of the week, but if you can't get the price, you've got to be right so many times at those prices in such a big handicap to actually, you know, make it pay. And it just wouldn't be a type of bet that I would necessarily be interested in. I'd rather back something at 25 or 33, especially with, you know, like the place terms on offer, and that'd be the way you go, or you just back in the place market against a short price favourite on the exchange and go that way as well. So it is vital. I think it took me a long time to realise when I was betting, and this isn't a carte blanche statement by any stretch of the imagination, but betting at short prices really only buys you a ticket for the next race. It won't affect your life. It won't sort of. You've got to be right so many times, you know, at 2-1 or shorter, really, to make it pay as a long-term strategy. That it's just probably something that doesn't interest me anymore. And I tend to look now. The meat of my sort of bets would be probably between 4 and 10-1, just because, you know, you've got a chance. You haven't got to be right quite so many times. You can still back good quality horses in the right races at those sort of prices. Donn will tell you with Kew Gardens, you know, you're backing a real good quality horse in a race where not many could win on Saturday. And if the favourite just does dip a little bit below his peak performance, you're going to get a nice payout. And, you know, that would rather be the way that I would look and approach races, really. Betting at the thin end is just so difficult to, you know, see your bank balance or your balances in your accounts increase, because you're literally going around in circles all the time. You know, it's just not the way to go forward for me.
I think value is everything, Tom, really. You know, like if you can bet a horse at a bigger price than the price that you think it should be, then if your judgment is like if you're correct about the price, that's the cornerstone. That's the foundation of it all. If you're look, you're not going to be right all the time, and who knows, you think a horse should be 4-1 and he goes off 6-1 and finishes 12th. Then you think, well, he shouldn't have been a 4-1 shot, but that's retrospectively fitting it. But if your judgment is accurate, and if you do the work and you have a good idea as to what price you think a horse should be, if you can bet at above that price, and if you're right about if you bet 5 horses at 4 that you think should be 4-1, then you know one of them's going to win on the law of averages. And if you're betting them all at 6-1, you're going to make a profit. So, and you know, it's back to horse racing. It's all subjective. Nobody really knows. Nobody knows what the true odds are. For all that, the final point on Matchbook at the off, that's a good guide as to what the true price of each horse is. But unlike in toss of a coin, of course, you know what the true odds are for heads or tails coming up. So, and if you can bet heads at 11-10 or tails at 11-10 every single time, in the long run, you will make a profit. That's for sure. And also, don't. Like, you hear a lot of horse wins and people go, that was serious value at 2-1. You know, that's okay in hindsight, but it wasn't in foresight. It's like saying tails comes up in the toss of a coin. That was a serious bet at 4-6. That was great value at 4-6. It wasn't. It won, but it wasn't a good bet at 4-6. So, and you know, you have to allow for the fact that if you bet a horse at 6-1 that you think should be 4-1, if it gets beaten, fine. That's the way it goes. You have to trust your judgment and allow for the fact that you're going to back plenty of losers. But if you can back, if all your bets are generally at bigger prices than you think that the true odds are, then in the long run you make a profit.
And I think that brings you on to if you're putting a few in, if you're doing a multiple and you see a horse, you might not want to back it outright because you think, well, it's a bit short and I wouldn't want to back it at that price, but I'm going to stick it in a multiple. The whole point of multiples is there's still got to be value. So if you're not going to back it on its own, don't whack it in a multiple. But this would be my ploy, because you don't want to back it on its own, but you think it'll win. If it's not value, it's not a bet. So,
but if you're multiplying odds that are not value, then you're actually getting worse value. Let's say if you're betting putting 2 3-to-1 shots in a double that you think should be 3-to-1, and if they're 2-to-1, so 2 3-to-1 shots in a double, it's 15-to-1. But if they're actually going off at 2-to-1, then the double is only 8-to-1. So you're getting 8-to-1 about something you think should be 15-to-1. So by multiplying them, you're actually multiplying the bad value. By contrast, the opposite is also the case. Like, people go, oh, multiples, they're bad bets, bookies love multiples. But if their value, if each element of the multiple is a value bet, so if you're betting 2 2-to-1 shots at 3-to-1, then you're getting 15-to-1 about the double that really should be 8-to-1. So you're multiplying the value. So multiples are actually good as long as you're getting or what you determine to be value. So, it's back down to the same cornerstone.
Sam, one thing I wanted to ask is, if you're sat there watching a race, or you're about to watch a race, and the horse that you've backed because you think it's value is taking a walk in the market, and you don't know why, and you're thinking, geez, this is off. Would you ever say, right, well, it's now double the price that I wanted to back it at anyway? Would you go in again, or would you say, somebody knows something I don't, or operate on that rule? Because horse racing, moreover than any other sport, when you have that many horses in a field, you're likely to get those bigger moves, perhaps against the way you want it to go. So essentially, would you back a drifter?
Yeah, I would. And then when they run abysmally, as Timoshenko did in the Cesarovic, you think, right, somebody's had me in the net there. And that double from 14 to near enough 30 in the 5 minutes before the race. Now, it ran accordingly as well. But those are really the exceptions to the norm, really. Most horses will run a pretty solid race. If you've got them high up on your speed figures, or whichever, form-based method that you use, and you expect them to run a big race, invariably they will, even if they extend by a point or two in the market, I would suggest. Like I say, you do get the exceptions to the norm, and that leaves you feeling pretty gutted that somebody does know a little bit more than you, but that's always going to be the case in life. So you said to me, Rose, there'll always be someone better looking, there'll always be someone richer, fitter, cleverer, and funnier than you, and that has been borne out on a number of occasions.
that on.
but it's just the game we play, and you have to put it down as just, yeah, okay, I'm on the wrong end of one there. You can't let it mentally, annoy you. That is the game that we're in, and unfortunately, those sort of instances are few and far between. I think you'd be unlucky to hit a few of those on a in a sequence, so to speak. So I would have a little bit more on. I would also be a little bit wary. I'd want to see connections first. If I saw like a Paul Nicholls horse drifting the point or two, it wouldn't concern me at all. But there are certain other yards that perhaps I would think, I don't think I'll go near that. They obviously don't think conditions are suitable, or that there's been an issue, or there's been might have missed a gallop, or this and that. So it's information that's not in the public domain. Not all information can be in the public domain. So I'll probably just have a look at the connections really, and treat each case individually.
A way to kind of counteract, well, not counteract it, but to kind of reduce the negative of that is, if you bet in the morning, then you don't, like you were talking earlier, Tom, about being at the races and seeing a horse in the paddock or horses in the paddock and thinking that it just wasn't their day, or they just didn't look well or weren't behaving or whatever it might be. If you bet at morning prices, like I know we come on to discipline a little bit, and Sam in terms of discipline or the psychology of betting, that when you're in the middle of a race meeting and when you're in the thick of it, you can make decisions that in the cold light of day are not good decisions. If you bet in the morning, you're betting at morning prices, you're betting without paddock information, which if you're not at the races, somebody's going to have better paddock information than you do. And, so if you bet a drifter, then of course the chance of that horse winning, it's reduced if the horse is drifting close to the off. But if you bet at morning prices and the horse contracts, then you're ahead of it. And at that time, all the paddock information, etc., hasn't been put into the market. So you're betting at prices without that information. So therefore, nobody, not that nobody has it, but that information is not in the market. So you're betting at prices in the morning based on form or whatever your reading of the race is, and all the other elements that go into it. So, like, I've backed horses in the morning in the past, and they've drifted, and you've gone, it's probably not going to win. And not invariably, but usually it doesn't win. But if you bet in the morning and all your bets are in the morning, and the horse, let's say, half of them contract and half of them expand, even at the zero-sum game, then at least you're not giving the edge to somebody else who's got the kind of paddock information that you don't have.
Just one quick salutary tale on paddock information and laying and whatever. There was an occasion at the Cheltenham Festival gone back, I'm sure it was Libertine in the old Mildmay fleet, that literally I've never seen a horse so awash with sweat and so agitated before a race. And I remember saying, I was stood next to Andy Holding, the aforementioned Andy Holding, who wouldn't be the greatest paddock judge in the world. He knows a good horse when he sees one on the clock, but he phoned a friend of ours, a mutual friend, and said, "Oh, you want to get stuck into this Libertine? There's no way on earth this can run a race." So the aforementioned friend of ours sold it on the spreads.
The aforementioned
made it at 25, 30 to 1. Mutual friend. It wasn't me, thankfully. I haven't got that sort of money to be laying 25 to 1 chances. And virtually laid it in every market that it could in match bets. Anyway, Libertine 25 to 1 bolts up in the Marmot fleet. That was a rather sheepish phone call that Andy had to have after the race. So it just shows that horses can drift markedly, can look awful, and they can still win.
Which is what brings us back to the point of your bankroll management. No matter how much a good thing you think, or you might be ahead of it, you've still got to, your risk management still has to be in play, doesn't it? Because you never quite know. We got animals running across a field here, so that's the sport we're playing.
This is it. Any horse can win any horse race on any given day. You see, all sorts of different, strange and bizarre results through a season where the amount of people will go, "How on earth is that one?" But they do win. The horses might be 2 stone wrong, and they win. We're talking flesh and blood here, not a computer program. So it does happen, and the guys on top, they sometimes affect an incredible performance or incredible victory. They might be tactically very sound one day. Everything might just drop right. The favourite might run abysmally. There might be 2 or 3 horses. Those of us who've seen 100 to 1 winners of Gold Cups. When that many things happen in a race that enables Norton's Coin to go and win a Gold Cup at 100 to 1, or Cool Ground to win one, and beat horses that have no chance of beating. It does happen on a fairly regular basis. So, the amount of times that you might catch yourself saying, "How on earth is that one?" It's pretty common.
Yeah, it's a combination of putting in the work and being up there with what you think is going to happen, and then managing your bank and being people often say, talk about people and say really good judge. I don't know if he's the best punter, but really good judge, and vice versa, because there are a lot of factions to juggle with making it work for you. Luckily, you're both in, so we're all right.
Well, apart from it, I mean, it's a bit rich. People say me coming on and pontificating about how to win a horse race, and when I gain a supplementary income, to a reasonable income from the media. So, I wouldn't want to start dictating to people how they should operate on a daily basis. All you can do is just pass on years of experience. I think for the first 5 to 10 years of my punting life, I wouldn't say that I won a dime really. It was literally just paying into an education. I might as well have gone to university, and I was that poor at it really that it took me a while to learn how to cope with money management. And I think a lot of people can pick winners. I really do. I think a lot of people nowadays, because there's better education out there, and I think that the channels are responsible for that in a lot of respects. There's some very good people work on our channel, as we know, that can sort of help to educate a little bit. And there's a lot of stuff that you can read on the internet, etc., to try and just to improve your analysis of a race. And I do think that that's improved immeasurably in the last 10 to 15 years. And you just have to work out really a method for yourself and what you're comfortable with, what your emotional threshold is as to losing money as well. What is really going to affect your day? Is that going to be losing 50 quid? Excuse me. Is that going to really take the edge off your day and spoil your evening meal? Or, are you happy that, you've lost £1,000 on the day, but you've bet all the horses that you wanted to bet and you think that they were good decisions at the time? And it's just working out where you are on that scale, I think.
Good stuff. Time has dictated we are going to leave it there with our betting strategy podcast. I could have waxed on a fair bit about that. I enjoyed that very much. Good stuff. Let's make the National Hunt season count. Donn, thank you very much indeed. Sam, thanks very much indeed. That was our strategy podcast. Looking ahead to the National Hunt season, we hope you have a great season. And of course, we're going to have lots more podcasts throughout the National Hunt season, looking ahead to what's going to be a great few months indeed. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.